Good evening. I'm Sean Childs, fantasy analyst.substack.com. Don't normally do live versions, especially on Twitter, where the crossover to what I do for work it does not translate well. But I thought I would take a few minutes. Done a lot of football research. Went to San Francisco and pretty much been a grunt writer for a number of years in fantasy football and baseball in the high stakes market. Been working on fantasy football projections for a number of years and been kind of pushing those out in a Google Sheet the last couple of years, trying to improve on the process and put out information. But I thought I would go through the process of where I'm at and some thoughts about football. And we're 5 weeks away from the first game in the NFL, which is kind of exciting, and it's kind of draft mode. And I just started a slow draft in the FFPC with my good friend Kimra Schleicher. Pick 8 or 9 and started with McBride because of the point and a half per touchdown. But let me go to I want to show this image right now. So this is the Substack. So this is where I'm at right now. Is that when you're doing information, trying to do it in hand. I had this long spreadsheet of Substack where I do the depth charts and show other information. I have like a kind of a show of almost like a cheat sheet with highlights to each individual player back to Substack, and you can click on it, highlight it, working on it. It's a work in progress. But the goal was to go to San Francisco, and my son is pretty sharp in the technology world, and I wanted to learn how to use AI a little bit, and I had a couple ideas, and I want to somehow translate some of this information that I have there into more viewership because people aren't going to click on a Google Sheet. So what ended up happening is that the first project was a baseball box score thing that I did, ccdesperados.com. And I'm sick of clicking on ESPN and stuff. I just want to see the box scores like newspapers. And I put them on one page, click on the top, added, my son did that, kind of showed me, to work through it, came home, put Cloud Code on a laptop. And I basically was able to put AAA scores, my fantasy points gain score, which is kind of rates the players for baseball. And I also connected this to the Substack to try to get some viewership of the content here. And this is the page that are on. But the reason I'm talking right now is because I want to talk about what I did with the information on thing. I basically, and then did this with the guidance of his code and thing. So this is, I just had to, I debated the name to use for a fantasy website. It's you're going to make a fantasy website, what are you going to make it? So fantasy football is pretty popular. Paydirt's for touchdowns. So I went with fantasyfootballpaydirt.com. I wanted to show my information when projections from the Excel that I have instead of a Google Sheet where people could visually go to it. So on this page is it's important for me in the fantasy market to give out information to save time and at least amount of time. So all 32 teams are here, and these are my projections. They're baseline, and there's a method to it. It doesn't have targets because I don't use targets when I do it. It's kind of an interesting way, and that's another for a long discussion. But you can look on any one of these. These were updated last week on Thursday. There's been a few changes over the last week, but this information hasn't been really that high. I will update it tomorrow. I'm kind of be on a week to week pace until we have a little more information. We get a little closer, I'll need to update a little bit more. So now I have the ability to update the projections and put them up, feed them up there for the season long. I'll have to obviously add tabs for week 1, week 2, and stuff like that, or progress that way and work on it. But all of this was pretty easy to negotiate because I already had the pregame work that I've done for a number of years and kind of pushed it. So what I did was the next page is really, really interesting for people that that play fantasy and play a lot of different levels, not really in the high stakes level. But so this is my quarterback rankings based on these scoring systems. So I have the NFFC, FFWC, which is kind of limited. It's under the umbrella of the NFFC, FFPC, RT Sports, former Wyckoff, Underdog, DraftKings, ESPN, and then people can custom. I don't have the fumbles in there. It's just a little blocky because I don't project fumbles, but you can go and see all the players. And I got Drake May rated number 1, and I have a big Patriots fan back home, and he kind of debated me on it, and I made some points, and that's another story to talk about. But anyways, So, the goal, like I said, people can look at it and you can see that, the different highlights of what's good, bad, and the colors are kind of important to me. And so I'm basically do two quarterbacks for every team. And then we can just switch over to running backs. Same thing. Bijan Robinson got the slight edge over McCaffrey. McCaffrey has the injury risk. Gibbs, great player everybody likes. But, I've done a secondary write up on Substack, doing player by player. And it really, really shines through that Gibbs is the kind of the most explosive player. Plays in a really good offense. But, opportunity, and will he get, 350 or 400 touches? I don't know. But, that's, like I said, that's another debate. So I showed all this information here for the same thing for, running backs, different scoring systems, wide receivers, um, and so on through tight ends. And this same thing, this has a time span in the upper right. When I update it tomorrow, it will change, and you can see that. And depending on how much people follow this or whatever, then I will update as I go along. And this is the next thing is the weekly game logs. I think this is a really interesting piece of the puzzle for especially for me when I'm doing the projections behind the scene. And nobody's gonna. The way I look at fantasy football, like in when we're playing for matchups, from setting lineups or even DFS, like for the DFS, or there's 5 or 6 weeks that I'm kind of going to be around it. You're going to get some stuff right. You're going to have some shots. If you can get all the pieces of the puzzle, you might get paid. But realistically, getting paid big isn't going to happen that often, and it depends on your budget. And I'm kind of fall more on the small budget thing, but I have been willing to push over my budget plenty of times over the last couple of years. So in this profile, this is basically the game logs last year for 2005 for the Arizona Cardinals, and their home and away matchups, their plays, time of possession, possessions, field goals, touchdowns, points, fumbles lost, interceptions, sacks allowed, and defense touchdowns, and special teams. Nobody ran it back. Like instead, it's kind of like when you're looking at it, it's kind of interesting when you see it, and then in the game totals at the end. But when you're looking at like matchups, sometimes you can see like, man, this team, like, really, I think the Colts really stand out. I think that's a really kind of I'll show you that one because it's really interesting because the Colts scored so many touchdowns in the early in the year, like 5, 6, 4, 5, 5, 6, when until Daniel Jones got hurt and scoring 33 whatever points. But you could see, how many times they got possessions and how many times they scored. It was pretty impressive. So like this stuff is kind of really kind of important when I'm doing it. And this sheet is kind of showed on my Excel really, really wide. And the same thing, you can go to the defense of what they allowed at the same time. But like I said, this is the thing. So next thing is over, the rushing yards for for quarterbacks, running backs, and then I used another column for others. So if a wide receiver ran it, or if there was some other guy like on fourth down, a safety or something ran it, that it falls in that column, and then the touchdowns and completions. And I put sacks in this twice because I thought it was important to show the sacks with the quarterback for the identifier, but I also thought it was important for the game log, and I would like to do something to do better projections for defenses, and had some thoughts about it. Not they're going to be perfect, but I'll work on it. And then touchdowns and stuff like that. But this is really kind of the most interesting dynamic. And I don't know where you see this a lot out in the public and stuff, but this has the running back catches, receiving yards, targets, and touchdowns. And so when you're doing matchups for, I'm showing defenses right now for Indianapolis. When you're doing matchups for head to head, like you could see like the Colts defense, gave up a lot of tight end stuff from week 6 to week 9 or something like that. And even better than that, you could go to the Cincinnati Bengals and you could see how bad they were. They were horrible. They did, kind of saved it 2 of the last 4 weeks of the season, but you could see they were getting crushed. And if you had a tight end you wanted to match it up to. So when you're looking like you're debating on tight end, like how do they do at tight ends? And a lot of times you don't see that information. It's broken down. And I think that's really, really, really important. It's something I think about when I'm, dictating how I want to divide up, touchdown passes to different positions. And it starts with, the quality of the player on the team. And at the same time, is the team in form and stuff like that. So that's the offenses. So that's that part of it, like that game book thing. And I have these for multiple years, and I could add, back a couple more years. But ideally, I would like this to be a live page that fills as the season goes on. And I've had a discussion with Claude earlier today, and I think that's very doable, and I'll work on that. I just have to do some other steps to do it. And then what I did here was I basically the offensive defenses and like during the season you're like who's the top running back offense, who's the best passing offense as far as fantasy points, and this is rated right now as his quarterback. Buffalo in DraftKings scoring right now, they scored 470 points, 17 points. Last was Tennessee. You see how in the passing attempts and whatever, you can see the good, the bad, and whatever, and you can switch whatever scoring system that you want and go like that. And then the same thing on defense. So last year Minnesota was a bad offensive team, but they played really good defense. Probably faced a little more rushing attempts than they should, but they did really, really well against quarterbacks. And I think that visual is kind of an interesting across the board. And I did that for running backs and the running backs, and I also showed on the running backs the receiving only, just to be a little different view for the offense and defense. Because I had originally, when I did the project, I started with the running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, and then I added the quarterbacks and running backs like last year. And same thing with catches for wide receivers. You can see the Rams, 243 catches, Dallas 253, like really, really throw the ball a lot. And I think that's pretty cool there when you're seeing that information. And then the defense, when you go over there and, the red's bad and, who's good against it. And I really think like when you're looking at this view and then you go back to look at the game logs, it kind of gives you an underlying profile of how each, page looks. And then at the same time, I did the tight ends and I have a tab to do in season. So same thing is once I get this connected up and I can do that one main step, the weekly gain logs, and it gets automated, this stuff will kind of filter on its own once I add in the formulas. These are pretty much strict uploads of an Excel sheet because I didn't really want to connect the dots, because I didn't know where it would go. And then this is the splits breakdown. Now, when all the game logs go into information, it's different ways. So this is really the totals rather than the week to week things. This is the total for all the teams for each of the plays for all year. And you can see like Buffalo like might have played a better defense, but they controlled the clock. They had the most time of possession of all teams last year, and you can see the low number of plays. And some of those are you think a defense is bad, and the time of possession kind of dictates some of it. And if you can control the ball, you keep the defense off the board, and maybe you play better than expected. So this is the same idea as before, but this has like 5 more. This is broken down a little bit different. Has like 5 tabs. The second one I put in here was rushing totals. So you get the quarterback and the running back rushing total. I'm sorry, the team rushing yards and the quarterback. And then I wanted to separate to see a visual of what the running back gets out of that offense. So it's a little bit different. Like if you have a big running offense, the quarterback sucks up a little bit. So how much does of that affect the running backs on that team? And it shows, even on the touchdowns when you got the the Buffalo quarterback scores 14, the running back scores 16. Look at Seattle, like 0 touchdowns out of the quarterback, 18 out of the running back. Seattle led the NFL. Not actually, their running backs were second in the NFL in carries, for running back carries, but I think they were first in. Buffalo was first in carries, but so like I said, that's broken down. Then I went to the running back. Receiving yards, receiving part of it, passing receiving parts, and then the running back catch stuff for the season, the whole total. And this part of the equation is more valuable when you're looking at you want to pick a player for this year. So if you're looking at I had a friend with a Dallas fan, Eddie Gillis, and how many catches is Javonte Williams going to have, and how much higher can he get? And when you look at last year. 61 catches. They gained basically 5.1 yards per catch, 308 yards. I think that was the lowest in the league. I scroll down here quick. Yeah. So so are they going to throw more to them? Are they going to rotate a second back? If you added another back to a different team and you want to the Chargers are a really good one because the last couple of years they haven't thrown the running back a lot of balls to the running back position. but Hampton's been, people are pretty attracted to him as an upside running back. But last year 63 catches. I know Hampton was hurt for part of the year. They gained only 6 yards per catch. Offensive line problems. The quarterback was banged up, gave up 60 sacks. Right here we can see it, and the Raiders gave up 64. But what areas of that team does it improve, and do they run the ball more? Do they throw the ball? So like, how much are you going to project Hampton or that offense to get? Are you going to get go to 80 or whatever? So these numbers that I look at, and I can look at a number of years and get if you have the same coaching staff or head coach, you got a feel for an offense might do, and you're just kind of trying to get a baseline profile of the teams. You're going to get a good portion of them you have a feel for, but there's some are really questionable. I think probably the Jaguars wide receivers are really complicated. They have four pretty good players, and the debate is, does Thomas come back, and Parker Washington, is he really legit, or is he really another version of Thomas? Thomas was great 2 years ago and then he faded. Can he, Washington repeat? But all signs seem like they like him. Same thing for the wide receiver and tight end catches and stuff. And like I said, this stuff's more valuable, I think, for drafting now, because you could say, I think a good example, because I was writing about like the top 12 receivers and the top 12 running backs or something like that. Or I would think I'm up to 36, but you got Pittsburgh Steelers offense. You got last year their wide receivers 136 catches, and I think Metcalf have almost half of that. So when you put Pittman on that team, like, will they throw the ball to the the wide receiver position 60 or 70 more times and increase that, and how much will Pittman get, and what changes, and but you can see like that number really kind of clean there when you're making decisions, and a lot changes with injuries, and there's I'm in the middle of baseball season. There's just been so many injuries, and we get all excited about these football teams, and about a week and a half or 2 weeks into the season, we're like, why did I draft that guy? But same thing with the tight ends, what they've done and stuff like that. And the last thing is, basically, I wanted to show the run-pass split. Dallas last year led the NFL in combined yards, 6,871. They were the top. They ran the most plays in the league, and it kind of just shows how it kind of breaks down in these categories. So you can just you get a feel for is this team a balanced offense, or is it gonna throw more? And like who's a good example of last year? There's somebody that threw the ball. I think Arizona is like a really good example of they added a young running back stud with a third overall pick, Love, and they threw the ball, I think, as a team like 659 times last year. Do they knock off 50 off that? The running back gets more. Do the coaches change it? He comes from the Rams system, wants to be aggressive and score and stuff like that. But does that mean that basically the Rams last year were they ran the ball a lot? So where's the Rams? The Rams were over here. The Rams ran the ball 43.8% of the time. They ran a lot of plays. They scored a ton. So how does that affect something like that? So like I said, that stuff is like a really important. And the last one is, this is kind of a feed off the Archie Sports has really had a really good grid for a long time, and they've kind of broken it down, and they don't show the full thing. So this data is basically off there, and there's a couple spots I saw that maybe in 2022, like their math isn't right, and I can't really, I don't have the data from week to week, and that stuff would be probably complicated, but I think this grid really gives you a good feel for, like, how consistent a player was at each position, how many big games they have. And so what I did was I put all these for all the weeks and their fantasy points, their averages, and the averages are, this average thing could be a little off because, you got a 0 in here and then he doesn't play, it should back out of it, and it doesn't. So I don't know how they handle that, but, I have it for, the last 4 years for running back. But at the same time, so if I'm at the quarterbacks, and you go to the breakdown range, I just like Josh Allen had 4 games, he scored over 30 points, 7 over 29. He had a floor rating of 64.7, which means that he scored over 20 fantasy points in, 65, almost 65% of his games, impact games over 30, and upside. And you could see, like, some of the players at some positions, you look at these, you're like, wow, that guy was consistent, but he, like, right here with, Baker Mayfield, he scored 20 or more points 58.8% of the time, but he had no really impact value, just kind of one game over 30 and just didn't get it done. And so that might dictate some of your decisions when you're doing drafts like that. Same with the running backs. Let's go back to the grid here. You're gonna, McCaffrey started out, busted out of the door so good and stuff like that. And so and the colors really shine when you're looking at this stuff, and you go down like I did 100 running backs, 60 or 50 quarterbacks, and then basically the data, it's crazy. It just kind of runs out in 120 receivers, but you just look at it and you're like, if you have a tough decision of between two players, even this draft, I know things are going to change this year, but if you're looking for a consistency factor or a big game factor that could this could influence your decision. The offenses will change and stuff like that. A wide receiver three, might want to swing for the fences. You want to top wide receiver one. The ideal is to have the guy that gets a lot of catches, a lot of yards, and scores a lot. But there's not a lot of those guys that fill that box. And the same thing goes for the tight end. So I think that this thing is kind of unique in a way. And I've worked on this, and I worked on it last night. And I'm going to have a similar grid to this for quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, with the ability to switch to different scoring systems with the data. But this time it's going to show what each team did, like the team quarterback did for a week. How many good games, how many bad games. Highlighted games, and how many were red and stuff like that. And I think that's kind of cool, and I should be able to filter that through and fill it through next season too, during the season as well. It's a little bit of, I hadn't worked on it in 5 years, but I had to mess with the math a little bit, and there's a couple numbers that don't match up to this team defense offense for the quarterbacks. I was starting to look at that, but the math was off just slightly, so I don't know why what was happening. So I got to look at it because it's kind of old. So, anyways, all of this is on my website, and I'm pushing the stuff rather than I still continue to put on Substack on the maintain the Google Sheet through the start of the season, and add some stuff and make sure I do that. But ideally, this is I think more people would look at this. I don't know how much traffic it will be. I don't know exactly where I go with what I want to do with this whole project, but you're in this writing content and developing websites, and you obviously put a lot of time in it, and it has to be your job, or does this actually, what I just did here, have more value to somebody else than what I can produce for it, and I could be a helpful part of it. So that's what I want to share. Anybody else, I'll push this obviously out on Substack as a regular feed thing so everybody can see it. But again, fantasy football, paydirt.com, new site for me, and I'll keep working on it. And I have some other ideas, and we'll see where it goes. And I'm working on another project with somebody else in Florida for something else that could be interesting for the the betting market, but we'll see if that translates well. So anybody that watched this on Twitter, I appreciate you watching and hanging in there, and the 44 of you there, that's pretty impressive for me, because like I said, the crossover rate on that site isn't very high, and I don't visually talk that much. It's not so much that I don't want to. It's just like you do in so many things, baseball, football, right? And then you want to go golfing or do something and go out to dinner with your wife or whatever, and it's like just too much. So appreciate your time. Good luck in your fantasy drafts, and we'll see if this works out. Thank you.